Well, hello there, and welcome to the February episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and I'm joined as usual by Marlene Royal.
Hello, Rebecca, and all our faster masters out there.
So, February, what are we doing? It's icy, it's snowy in the Northern Hemisphere. It's erg time, Marlene.
Yeah, we're deep in erg time. Freezing rain today. So that's what we're focusing on.
A lot of us are going to be using the erg to not only train for endurance stuff, but also to practice racing. And today I want to talk about erg race plans.
Excellent.
So let's talk it through. We've all done different sorts of testing. What's your method for a race plan for an erg test? We're talking a 1K test here.
I think what you want to do first is make sure that you're setting yourself up for the best possible trial, and take your trial seriously. Think about what you're going to do the 24 hours before your trial. This means how are you going to sleep? How are you going to schedule a little bit of extra recovery the day before you do your trial? Deciding what your goals are for your trial, for this particular trial. Plan it out. Use this as your race preparation, just like you will in the summer when you go to a regatta. You know, set out your clothes, pack your gym bag, write your timetable, what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. When are you going to start your warm-up? What are you going to do from your warm-up? Your warm-up, you should have that worked out well ahead of time, because you can do that in practice. How many minutes is it going to take you to warm up? Then how many minutes are you going to rest when you're waiting for the starter? Because there's always a little, if you're at an erg regatta, erg race, or at a regatta, there's always a little bit of lag time when you're sitting there for a couple of minutes before you actually start. So I think setting up the background in terms of your nutrition and your rest gives you the best opportunity to start that trial with a really clear head. And to be mentally tough, which you have to be when you're doing an erg trial, you must be concentrated and you must be as rested as you possibly can, because mental toughness relies on your ability to concentrate. And if you're going into this trial really tired, or you stayed up too late, that's going to affect your willpower to a large degree, because you need a lot of focus to be able to get through those tough parts of the test.
That is so true.
Yeah. And it's so easy to be, you know, if you're doing a trial at home, it's so easy to be casual about it. Oh, you know, we stayed up to watch the movie a little bit longer, and then, you know, I get an email the next morning. Well, you know, I really should have rowed 156, but I rowed 158. And then you say, well, why should you have? You know, this isn't, you didn't do it, you know. And so, you know, don't beat yourself up because you didn't do it, but just own what you did. I mean, that's another thing with trials. And this is all practice to prepare you to be a better racer on the water, if that is your goal in the summer, or to do trials better. So you need to set up that background. For your actual race, I think there are a couple of things that are important. One is to, you know, we're going to assume here that you have a little bit of experience in your training, that you know what your target split is for your test. And say you've done one before. Now, if you're doing a 1K test, try to for your pacing, split it into 4 quarters. So you have your 250, your 500 meters, your third quarter, and your fourth quarter, and work out your times. Like, if say your goal is to row 2 minutes, and maybe you're aiming, you know, I think in a 1K, if you're aiming to row 1 second per 500 faster, It doesn't sound like a lot, but in a 1K, every second per 500 meters really matters, and they're very hard to come by. So I would say if your goal is to average 2 minutes, row your first 250 at 159. Row your second 250 at your desired average, 2. Row your third 250. If it slips to 201, just deal with it, accept it, that you're in the hazard meters, we call them. You're in the deep part of the race. And then for your last quarter, get it back to your average split that you want, your 2 minutes. And if you can go faster than that, go faster. It's pretty simple. It allows for that fatigue in the third quarter. I think where you have to be exceptionally careful is not to go too fast in the first 250. 1 second faster than your goal doesn't sound like much, but if you go 2 or 3 seconds, you're like, wow, I feel great. I'm going to do 157. It's going to catch you in the third quarter, 100%. You're not, if you're not ready to do that, you're not quite ready to do that. So those are things to practice at, in your workouts before you do the race plan. That's just one strategy that I like to use, that I think is simple, and it keeps you under control but aggressive at the same time. And think of a few technical points that keep you rowing well. The importance is our goals on the ergometer are a little bit different than in the boat, because things that give you better scores on the ergometer do not necessarily always help you in the boat, but we won't go into that today. but do focus on what you need to tell yourself to row your best race. If you know that you really need to focus more on your leg drive, or you need to focus more on breathing, whatever you need, whether you need something to calm you down or you need something to lift you up, pick 2 or 3 technical points and decide where you're going to focus on them for this 30 seconds, or what you're going to tell yourself in the third, how to get through the third quarter, stroke by stroke. What are you going to tell yourself to get through that, 1 stroke at a time? And keep everything more simple as you get deeper into the race, because you're getting tired and your brain is not going to be as logical. It's going to be much more emotional as you get deeper into the race. So even just something like push, if it's just a short, quick word, it just keeps you focused on the stroke is at hand. And that's the goal, is just to row it 1 stroke at a time, and just don't get ahead of yourself.
I like your variations on a split, 500-meter split through the 4 quarters. And I personally have used a similar strategy. I would add that when you're transitioning from the first quarter to the second, try to make your movements really efficient. So you're aiming to go from your first quarter, you're going to be under your target. Your second quarter is on your target. So you don't have to work too hard. And can you save that energy, sort of keep the power in the battery cell?
Exactly.
Ready for when you need it in the third quarter.
Absolutely. That's why you have to be so careful with the first quarter. And for people who do 2K races, I think we would emphasize this even more, because it's a longer piece. But you have to, and that's part of the discipline of doing erg trials, which I think really helps you learn how to race well on the water, because you have to learn how to control the speed in those early stages of the race. And it takes a lot of discipline, and I think it takes a lot of practice to get good at that, and to be confident that I'm not going to go as fast as I possibly can here. I'm going to row this first quarter wisely so that I can maintain the highest average pace. Because it is a time trial. On an erg, it's a time trial. So it's you against the clock. And, the more you can keep things relatively close together in even speed, the better. And I remember when I was a competitive athlete, and I competed on the elite level until I was 39 years old. And in the year 2000, we would go to the speed orders down in Augusta, Georgia, Aiken, South Carolina, and the national team men, the scullers, were there training with Igor Grinko. And when we had to do 2,000 meter tests, they would do their start and then sit right on the average pace that they wanted. I mean, there was just no fluctuation. Once you just got the flywheel going, and then they just stayed right on it. So, you could always try that strategy. You could, if you're very disciplined, you could say, I want to row 2 minutes, and I'm going to sit right on 2 minutes, and you can see how that works for you. You can do it the other way, where you've got that little bit of variation that accounts for the fatigue, but it gives you the average that you want. And these are definitely things to practice in your workouts and see what one might fit your personality better.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good encouragement. When I was doing 2K racing, I would actually use a bigger fluctuation. So I would do my first quarter 2 seconds faster than my target average.
Mm-hmm.
Do the middle 1,000 2 seconds slower.
Okay.
And then the last quarter as hard and as fast as I could. But I know I'm a really good sprinter at the end of the race when everyone else is really super tired, and I can fly, and then I die, of course, but I'm good at judging it. So I can outperform in the last quarter what my target is.
See, so I'm the opposite. As an athlete, as a 2K racer, I was exactly the opposite. And this is why it's so important for our listeners to practice these things. It's okay if you go do a trial and you totally mess it up. It's okay. You learned that's not the right strategy for my body or my mind. I don't like that. It doesn't work. I'm the opposite. My physiologist called me the Clydesdale, okay, because if I was very, very strong and could do a lot of volume of work, but in a 2K race, if I was going to win that race, I had to do it on average pace because I have no sprint, and I don't have that secret gear. So you had to make sure that you were far enough and that you made up that middle base. So it's an absolutely different strategy. And when we watch videos of Olympics and World Championships, you have no idea what they're really doing. They all have their own strategy that matches their body type, and you have to do the same thing for testing for your club, or if you're going to an erg race, you have to spend the time and practice to figure it out. That's where you want to practice it and know whether it works or not. You don't want to discover this on race day. So hopefully.
I'm going to add a couple of mental insights that might be useful. I knew Harry Mahon, the great Kiwi coach, quite well for a while. And when he was coaching Greg Searle, who was the British single sculler, he also coached him through the 4 quarters of a race. And he said, the start is the first quarter. You can do that. The finish is a sprint. It's the last quarter. You can do that too. But where the race is won or lost is in the middle 2 quarters. And he said, mentally, when you move into the second quarter of the race, you need to be tough on yourself. And then when you move into the third quarter of the race, you need to be tough on everyone else. So
absolutely.
You make it hard for them to beat you.
And in some I've done some articles on race analysis, and most races of analysis of international races, oftentimes those races are lost in the second quarter because if the crew's boat speed drops too much below what their average pace will be, they can't make that up in the third quarter. So oftentimes the winning crews are the crews who stay the closest to their average pace in that second quarter into through the middle. So it's having that strategy for staying tough on yourself. And that's where you have to take it one stroke at a time and pay attention to one stroke at a time. And sometimes in a plan, like maybe it doesn't work to look at meters. For me, in my best 2K races or erg races, I do not look at meters until I'm at the last maybe 150. I do it by time. So, for example, if it were, we'll just use 4 minutes as an example as a 1K. I would break it up into 4 minutes, and each one has each 30 seconds has a focus, and I just might repeat that. 30 seconds I focus on this, 30 seconds I focus on that. Okay, before the next focus, if my split's not there, I try to bring it back down again, then I put my focus. So what worked for me is not looking at those meters, just focusing on what I was doing for little time blocks. And then when I got into, then I knew, okay, I'm getting into the final stretch, then I started counting the meters. But that was something that worked for me because looking at the meters scared me. So I couldn't do it.
Yet again, I'm your opposite. I love
interesting. Oh, you love your meters. So
because I run a race plan in my head with counting out blocks of 10 strokes on the legs in different combinations. I have 10s and 20s and 30s. I have things I do. I'm not going to share them now. And they are triggered by me arriving at a set meter distance. So I know I'm going to do something 5 strokes before I hit the 250 meter mark.
Okay, interesting. So I would say that and it's interesting for our listeners to think about, okay, how do you handle this? Like I would my race plan on the erg is absolutely different than how I race on the water. On the water, I race more like you, that I'm even extreme to the point that I know every single stroke, and in every single stroke, I know what I'm supposed to be focusing on, and I know where I am, because sometimes there's not a buoy, or sometimes the red buoy line is missing, or one time at nationals, our 500-meter buoy was missing, and everybody's looking around because they don't know where they are. So I do that on the water, but on an erg race, I kind of, because maybe it's more of a time trial format or something, I mentally focused on that a little bit differently. But again, that's something for people to experiment about. Do you want to start practicing your on-water 1K race plan now for your 1K test? That's another consideration. Do you want to row it a different way? There's no right or wrong here. It's all about discovering what works best for you. And the important thing is to choreograph it and like get it in your genes. It's got to be etched in your neurons so that when you race, you're not thinking too hard. You have to be on automatic. You have to train consciously to race on autopilot to some degree. So there are a lot of individual things, but those are things too. Do you want to practice your on the water 1K? Do you want to row it just by time? So I used to approach them differently because I did better on the erg that way, and better on the water the other way. But there's no absolute right or wrong. It's just it's about experimenting and figuring out what works best. Failing sometimes, a good bad test, then you say, well, why was that a bad test? Or if you had a bad erg regatta, and I often will ask my athletes, go back 24 hours, and I want you to, and I have them send this to me, write to me 10 things that you did very well before your race, and write 10 things that you've got to improve on for next time. And 20 points is a lot of things to think about. So, it does. And if people start to do that for every trial, they start to say, oh, okay, well, this is what helps me repeat this and make it better. Because if you have a good trial, I'll say to someone, well, tell me why it was a good trial. Why was this one good and last month's wasn't good? What defined that? What made the difference for you? Because you need to replicate that as much as possible.
You do. Now we're going to move on to a listener question that has come in from Tanya Carson. Tanya is an Australian living in America, in Detroit. And she says, what is your take on using watts or heart rate for training zones for masters?
Well, Tanya's in a very snowy place right now, so she's definitely using the erg. I use watts or splits in training much more than heart rate with my athletes. The main reason why is you have a lot more variations with heart rate, and heart rate can be a very, very accurate tool, but it takes a little bit more work, and it's a little bit more complicated to make sure that your heart rate zones are accurate. If you're trying to calculate your heart rate zones from a formula, it's not going to be right. Most people don't know what their true max is, which is what you need to know for any of those formulas to work. And most of them are really not based on an athletic population. However, if you do want to use heart rate, you need to go to a physiology lab or a good fitness center that does blood lactate testing. And you have to get the blood lactate testing because you have to correlate what is happening in your metabolism and in your blood with what pace you're at and what is happening with your heart rate, because they have to give you points. This is your aerobic threshold, you're at this heart rate. This is your anaerobic threshold, you're at this heart rate. And if you don't correlate that with your blood lactate levels, your heart rate zones don't mean anything. So it can be very accurate, but you have to retest that about every 3 months, because as you get more fit, those values they're going to change, right? And so you do have to retest that and be devoted to that. Otherwise, it's just, some people have them at home, their little lactate machines. You can do them. You can purchase really good little machines and do it at home as well. So that is an option. I find not that many people really want to go through the hassle of it. So training by performance paces is the next best thing, and is generally very, very accurate. I've tested many people who have done their 20-minute test, and it's a 20-minute test that we use to determine training paces. And from the 20-minute test, you take your average split. And in terms of Tanya's question, you can take your average split. You can also take your average wattage. And there are some coaches who have their formulas based on the wattages for each of the 6 training categories. I tend to use splits, but once you have those splits, if you prefer to row by watts, you can just convert it into watts. There's a Concept 2 has a watts pace calculator that's really simple to do that. And these are very accurate because your performance test is going to give it's a little bit higher level than, say, your anaerobic threshold, and it's a set distance. It's better than using a 5K. A 20-minute is a 20-minute. Okay, some really fast guys, masters, they can row 5K in 18 or 17 minutes. That's already a different test than a 20-minute. As well as some women, if they're rowing 22, 23 minutes, it's also a very different test than 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is important. Number of athletes, I've had them do this, correlate their paces, and then also do the blood lactate testing just to compare, and it compares very, very well. It's very close. And if you take your 20-minute pace, and now you've done all your prep work, you're 24 hours ahead, you've got your game plan for your 20-minute test, how are you going to do it? One thing I would say is, if you've done a test the month before, the next test, aim for 1 second per 500 meters faster on the next test, not 4 seconds per 500 meter fit. That is just, your body is not going to do that. I can guarantee it. 1 second per 500 meters improvement in a month's period of time is an excellent rate of improvement. So, and you want that to be consistent. So, but row your 20-minute test. And once you have your split, again, we'll use 2 minutes as a nice healthy split for a 20-minute. Your category 6, which is your long, low aerobic distance, you add 13 to 18 seconds. And so you would be rowing 213 to 218. You have a little bit of a range there, which kind of allows you to row 18 strokes a minute or 20 strokes a minute. But this is not a super challenging range, nor should it be. This is not what builds your speed. This is what builds your recovery in your training and your volume and all the good, really the base of your fitness pyramid. The next category, the category 5, is I call this like it's firm. It's a good firm row. You can still talk if you want to, but it's a good, it's a little bit more concentrated. It's a good solid firm pressure. And for your category 5, you add 8 to 12 seconds to your average split. So in this case, you would row 208 to 212. And for those of you who do marathons, this is kind of your marathon pace for people who do marathons. It tends to settle right in that range. Your category 4 is your anaerobic threshold. So this is an important pace, and that is just 2 seconds added to your 2-minute. So if you're rowing 2 minutes, now your AT workouts are going to be at 202, which is pretty challenging. It's not an easy pace, but it should be doable. It definitely should be doable, but I call it comfortably hard. What's important to mention, these 3 categories, 6, 5, and 4, it's very important not to go faster than indicated. You do not gain anything extra. If anything, you just waste some energy trying to go faster in these particular ranges. These are not where you make your speed. These are base aerobic. These are where you elevate your overall base pace, and you have to control your speeds here to get the training effect that you want. When you get up into your next level, your category 3, this is where this is where you start getting into those deep intervals, I would say. Your category 3 is 2 seconds faster. So that would be a 158 if you had a 2 minutes. And this is where you do those 5 times 5 minute pieces, 4-minute pieces, maybe a 6-minute piece, or combinations with some other things. This is where you start to get a lot of lactic acid in this category. So here it's important to row fast enough, not to be, oh, okay, I'm just sitting under it a little bit. I'm not sitting on my 20-minute split. Here you have to push and make sure that these are fast enough to get the training effect that you want. And your category 2 is pretty close to your race pace for your 1K, and it's about 5 seconds faster than your Cat 3. So if I was rowing 158, I would be 153 for my Cat 2, which is a really challenging pace. And those are going to be like your 2-minute pieces. That this might be your one-time all-out time trial, something like that. And we do have a Cat 1 pace that doesn't have a speed assigned to it. It's just faster than your race pace. So this is where you might do starts. This is where you might do 15 or 20 stroke accelerations higher than race pace. It's more for coordination and blade work. It's not really an aerobic type of a category. And if you start to see like, oh, these paces don't feel that challenging anymore, retest your 20 minutes and get a new baseline. Okay, so if you're getting more fit, your 20 minutes is going to improve. And so if you improve your 20-minute, now it's 159 for your workouts. Maybe you have the same workouts still in that month, but now all those workouts start being done a little bit faster. And that's where you make sure that you increase the stimulation, but you don't overdo it, and you let your body adjust to it. If you're sick, also, you had a long layoff from training, as much as you don't want to see that number for that 20 minutes because you've been off training and it's not going to be your personal best, you must do it. And it's important because it gets you back into your program at the level of fitness that you're at. And so it ensures that you're not going to go back to what you were doing 2 months ago before your injury. You're not at that fitness level right now. So you need to own it, honor it, and just start there. And when you start to feel a little bit faster, just retest it. But don't improve your paces unless you've earned it.
Great. So I'm just going to summarize for people who use average watts, those zones. This is the percentage of your average. So training category 6 is 55% of your average. Category 5 is 75%. Category 4 is 90% of your average. Category 3 is 97%, which is, as Marlene said, very approximately working hard, rowing fast enough. Then it goes to 1.2, so times your average. So it's faster than your average. And 1.5 times your average. And that is the uppermost limit. There are actually, it's a range, very much like Marlene said, but anyone can contact me if they want to know what they think that should be.
Yes. Well, those agree very, very closely. And as people know, whether you prefer watts as a measurement or splits, it doesn't matter. In Europe and in Australia and New Zealand, they probably tend to use watts more. In North America, they tend to focus more on splits, but it's still just giving you that reference of a power measure. And either calculation, they both agree with each other. So it's just a great, safe, reliable way to train, and you don't have to go to a lab, and you can retest this once. In the winter, I like to have people retest once a month because they're probably on the erg quite a bit, and they're doing different type of training than in the summer. Once I get into the summer months, we really tend to focus on 1K, but this is a way to really give you solid guidelines, and it's the next best thing to getting professional testing in a lab.
It sure is. Marlene, thank you. That's a great summary, and we've got a lot to work on through February, I can see.
Yes, the snow is flying somewhere.
And please, to the listeners, help us spread the word. Tell your friends about Faster Masters Rowing Radio. You can subscribe at www.rowing.chat. And that subscription will send you notifications once a week of any new podcast on the network, including Faster Masters Rowing Radio.
Now, Rebecca, is there somewhere if people want to send in questions, how they would do that?
Put a comment underneath the video on YouTube of this episode, or you can message me, Rebecca at caroe.com. That's CAROE. Brilliant. Till next time.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Goodbye, everyone.